Okay, nice to see you all too. Nice to be back. It's several times that I've been here already this year, so it's lovely to be back. This time in spring with everything in bloom outside, so I'm enjoying that very much. Maybe it's something to do with the spring, but I wanted to speak this morning about fire and fire in our practice or heat in our practice. So the sun is starting to come a bit more strongly, isn't it now, and more heat. And yeah, like Taraparlita said, there's this whole notion of effort and exertion and how we bring effort to our Buddhist practice. So I want to explore that by using the image or the metaphor of fire. And just as a way into that, I thought I'd mention a poem that's, I'm not going to read the poem, but somebody mentioned it to me a couple of weeks ago, coincidentally. And I really loved the poem, so I just want to share something of that poem with you. So it's a poem by W.H. Auden, and it's about suffering. And in the poem, Auden's talking about how bizarre it is, how strange it is that there can be intense suffering in the world, and at the same time, things that are going on that are completely unrelated to that. So he gives the example of a medieval torturer. So somebody that does all kinds of nasty things to people. That can be going on, but then his horse can be tied up next to a tree somewhere, and the horse is just doing its horse thing and kind of scratching its bum on the tree. So you've got this kind of strange situation where all kinds of terrible things can happen, and at the same time, other life's just going on in other kind of innocent ways. So the innocent horse is just scratching its bum on a tree. And actually, yesterday when me and Taraparlita are out, we see this around us, don't we? We were sat on the side of the canal drinking our tea, and on one side we could see kind of tents and mattresses just strewn on the bank. And the side we were on, we had a nice cup of green tea, and there was a cafe with all these pastries behind us. So you've got this kind of strange situation, haven't you, where you can have kind of a lot of hardship and then kind of luxury just on either side of a canal. So Auden's making the point that, well, life is like this. We've got these two things side by side, and it's strange, isn't it, when we stop and think about it. That's a strange situation to be in. But the other thing he mentions is the myth of Icarus. So in the same way, he says, you know, you've got this great myth of Icarus who flies, his father gives him these wings to escape from the island of Crete. And Icarus flies off, and the father warns him, don't get too low to the sea because the damp will bring your feathers down. Don't get too close to the sun, because if you get close to the sun, the wings will melt and you'll crash. But Icarus doesn't listen, so he flies too high, flies too close to the sun. His wings, the wax in the wings melts, and he just crashes down into the sea and is drowned. So Auden brings that into the poem because he's seen recently Peter Bruegel's painting of the fall of Icarus, I think in Belgium somewhere. And in the painting, I had a look at the painting, it's amazing. It's just this quite normal scene, and in a tiny little bit in the corner, there's just a pair of legs sticking out of the sea. But if you didn't know it was there, and you didn't know the painting was called The Fall of Icarus, you might miss that. So in the poem he's describing how you've got a ploughman going along in the foreground, and maybe he heard a splash, but to him it wasn't that big a deal that Icarus has fallen out of the sky. Maybe he heard a splash. And then the sun is shining on Icarus's white legs, but only because it has to. You know, not because there's anything special about Icarus falling out of the sky. Well, the sun just shines on things, so it has to shine on his legs. And then there's this really elegant looking ship that has presumably seen this amazing event of a boy falling out of the sky into the water, but it's got somewhere to go. So the ship just carries on going. So there are different ways of interpreting the poem. One is that how strange it is that people are indifferent to suffering. I think another reading of the poem is, this is the way I read it, that sometimes what we consider to be our great failures, on the grand scheme of things, from a broader perspective, maybe it's not that big a deal. So I'm speaking there based on my own recent experiences, that sometimes we can fall back from things that we're very ambitious about, but actually maybe it's not that big a deal, and maybe we're also the ploughman and we're also the ship, and there's another part of ourselves that's just calmly kind of sailing on and not so worried about the big ego project that we had to fly towards the sun. So I mention that because I think personally I can relate to Icarus. So I've been thinking about my own life and the kind of effort that I make in life and the fire that I try to conjure up and access. And it's definitely Icarian, if that's a way of putting it. It's definitely of the nature of Icarus, you know. I definitely want to fly towards the sun. And maybe other people can relate to that. There's a few giggles. So maybe we can relate to that. And I think, in a way, it's probably fair to say modern life encourages that kind of force, doesn't it? You know, force to achieve, drive to achieve. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, isn't it? At times to have that kind of drive and capacity to really focus and concentrate and fly towards the sun. I think we need that. I think the problem I've had in my life is that that's the only type of fire that I've known, or it's the main type of effort that I've been able to make. And I think it works for a while, and then there's a kind of burning up, or burning out. That's a common phrase, isn't it, these days, burnout. People experiencing it in work, stressful environments, family life, but also in Buddhist life as well. I think we can burn out if we're not careful. So I think for myself, I've just tried to take more of an interest in effort and the way in which I make an effort, and how do we make effort, like Tarapalita said, that is sustainable, an effort that we can maintain throughout our lives. So how do we do that, and what has Buddhism got to teach us about that? And actually Buddhism says a lot about effort. I haven't looked into it deeply, but I've looked into it enough to see that the Buddha had quite a lot to say about effort. And the word that often gets used in Buddhist teachings that's translated as effort is padhana. Padhana. So it translates to something like exertion or striving or effort. So most commonly effort. And you get Buddhist teachings like the 4 right efforts. So that's probably the most well known. So the 4 right efforts, just briefly, are that we should prevent the arising of negative mental states like anger and craving and things like that. If they have arisen, we should do what we can to get rid of them. That's the second one. We should also cultivate positive mental states like love and generosity. If they haven't arisen, we should, if they have arisen, we should then maintain them. So cultivating the good, maintaining that, preventing the negative and getting rid of it if it comes. So that's a classic Buddhist teaching on effort. Very useful, but I have to say for me, the way my mind works, that kind of abstract instruction, you can probably see in the way I've started the talk, I need images and kind of poetry and things to want to do it, to be frank, or to remember it. So for me, that list is very good, but I need to somehow associate images with it. Thankfully, the Buddha knew that there were people like me. I don't know if he knew that there's people like me going to come along 2,500 years later, but in his own time, there were people like me. I take comfort in that. So he would also teach in images. And one of the images he gives for effort has really struck me very forcefully. Before I tell you what that is, just a few words about effort, or about the word effort, because we'd better define it, haven't we, if we're going to explore it and use it. So the English word effort comes from Latin. So it comes from the Latin word ex fortis. Ex fortis. So ex means out, so outward. And fortis means strength. Strength, courage, bravery, forthrightness, that kind of thing. So in itself, it's a charged word, isn't it? It's a strong word. So when we make an effort, there's a strength to it. There's a bravery to it, a courage to it. I think, given what we're trying to do here, it's not just courageous. It's also a bit rebellious, isn't it, and subversive in a world that's not necessarily trying to encourage us in loving kindness, generosity. In some ways it is, but in other ways it definitely isn't. It takes courage, strength, effort to do that, to practice Buddhism in the modern world. So when we think of effort in that way as something strong, something courageous, the images that probably come to mind are, the kind of heroic images, warrior images even, the archetype of the warrior. So the Buddha was from a warrior clan and often spoke in those terms, that practicing Buddhism was like, practicing his teaching was like being a warrior, or required a kind of warrior spirit. Those images are strong. The problem with those images with somebody like me, of the Icarus variety, is that it just intensifies everything. And I just make even more effort in the wrong kind of way. But again, luckily, the Buddha maybe had me in mind 2,500 years later, and he gave another teaching where he spoke of effort, or the effort that we should make, as being like a chicken. So the effort we should make is the effort of a chicken, or more correctly, a hen, so a female chicken. So I'm starting to think of myself and the effort that I'm making in my Buddhist life as being like a female chicken, which has been very helpful. So I'm going to unpack the image. So what the Buddha says is that, he's talking to a group of monks. So he's talking to a group of his male disciples, and he says, look, monks, if you want to make progress, if you want to be released from all the things that hold you back, he says it's not good enough just to think, I wish that I was released from all the things that hold me back. He says you can't just have the aspiration, you've also got to follow that up with action. So he says, it's just like being a hen. If a hen has 8 eggs, or 10 eggs, or 12 eggs, and she sits on them, but she doesn't cover them all properly, and she doesn't heat them, and she doesn't incubate them. If a hen were to do that, even if she is wishing, oh, may my chicks break through these eggs with their tiny beaks and claws, that won't happen. They won't be able to do that because they won't have been warmed. And he says, on the other hand, if the hen covers all of the eggs correctly, warms them and incubates them, then eventually the eggs will hatch. So he says that's the kind of effort that you need to make in your spiritual life, in Dharma practice. So it's interesting, isn't it, having that as a contrast to the kind of warrior-like effort. And I think it's significant. I think there's a lot in that image that we can explore. So I'm going to take us through a few points that have struck me as being important about this image and this way of talking about effort. Incidentally, I'll just throw this in for an extra set of images. So it's not just in Buddhism that you get this image. So in the alchemical tradition, so this tradition we had of alchemy that was ultimately replaced by or morphed into modern chemistry. Before that, you had all these people trying to discover the philosopher's stone. Probably you've heard of alchemy and you know all this, but you got these alchemists who were trying to discover the philosopher's stone, and have the capacity to turn raw materials or base metals and materials into something precious substance like gold. But it wasn't just a kind of objective scientific experiment. The alchemists also recognized that in doing this, in working with these materials, they were also being worked. So it was a spiritual practice to work on these metals and materials. They were also working their own spirit. They were working their own minds, their own psychology. So they were, in a sense, they were the raw material as much as the metals that they were working on. And the gold could be expressed through their lives rather than just in the material. And the alchemists obviously used fire. So they used heat in these experiments, in these chemical processes. And the classic list in alchemy is of 4 types of fire. And the first one is the same as the one that the Buddha uses. So it's the fire that is generated by the hen sitting on her eggs and incubating the eggs. The second is the fire of ashes. So ashes are interesting, aren't they? Because they've obviously burnt up. It's a fire that has burnt, but they maintain some heat. So in the ashes, you can actually handle ashes and feel the heat in ashes. Perhaps that's a parallel, if we're thinking of an internal process, to something like memory. So when we remember things, even traumatic things or painful things or ecstatic things, really enjoyable things, because it's memory, some of the fire has gone out of it, but we can still touch the ashes in the memory, and that can give us heat and reinforce our effort. We learn from experience, don't we? So we learn from the ashes of past experience. The third type of fire in alchemy is the fire of the desert. This is the one that I've been overdoing. So the fire in the desert is everything is sand, everything is burnt out. And just as if you were going through a desert, it would require intense effort and kind of bravery and the capacity to risk everything. That's the third type of fire. So in a sense, sacrificing everything, going into the desert, going into the heat of the desert. And the fourth type of fire in alchemy is it's quite mysterious. It's like the living flame. So I interpret that as there's no difference anymore between the alchemist and the fire. The fire is the alchemist and the alchemist is the fire. So we become the effort and the effort becomes us. It's not something we are doing objectively. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in. So 4 types of fire in alchemy. I imagine there's a talk on each of them, but let's focus on the first one, because that's what we get also in this teaching by the Buddha. So the heat, the fire, the effort that is like a hen sitting on her eggs, brooding on the eggs. So I think the first thing I like about the image here of the hen is that it's a very physical image, isn't it? So maybe you've got an image in your mind, or we can imagine it, can't we? If we were to do a meditation now and I were to give the instruction, I don't think I'd ever do this, but if I were to give so just sit there like a hen sitting on her eggs, maybe you'd feel a kind of, kind of heavy downward going energy. So it's a very embodied image, isn't it? With a focus on what's below, on the contact with the nest. Nest's interesting, isn't it? Kind of roost and home. So it's a very grounded, physical image that we've got. I think one of the problems I've had in overzealous effort, let's say, is that I lose touch with the body, or can lose touch with the body. So I could be very inspired and up, and we need that energy too, but I can leave the body behind. So actually this image of the hen is helpful in that it brings me down to the ground, it brings me home to roost, brings me down to the nest. I think that's really important, generally, in life, but in Buddhist practice, there's got to be foundations. There's got to be ground. There's got to be inhabiting our physicality, not just our physical body, but our kind of energetic body. So you get this a lot in Buddhist teaching, a constant emphasis on the body and its movements, being aware of the body and its movements, particularly in meditation. So the Buddha spoke of 4 foundations of mindfulness, the first one being mindfulness of the body. Where are we if we're not physically present in our embodied experience? We can kind of drift off, can't we, into disembodied thought worlds, or in my case, kind of over-idealism that loses touch with the ground. So, a lot of emphasis on that in the Buddhist tradition. And a lot of examples of people struggling with that or discovering the value of that. So my favourite example is of the Japanese Zen master Hakuin. So Hakuin, his practice when he was a younger man was all about koans. So maybe you've come across koans in your exploration of Buddhism. This is where we've got a statement that doesn't make rational sense, and we just have to meditate upon it intently. So maybe the most famous one is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? What is this? Come on, the Zen master would be saying, what is the sound of one hand clapping? And you'd have to give an answer. And if you couldn't answer, he'd probably give you a smack. And then you'd have to go away and think about it. And then you'd come back and you'd give him your answer. And you'd go away and think about it. So there's this constant trying to work something out. But you're trying to work it out to get to the point where you realise it can't be worked out in this particular way. Something has to break and something else has to come through. But Hakuin got into trouble because he was so fiery, let's use that language, that he would turn these koans over in his mind so much. He'd have great breakthroughs, he'd see amazing things and realise certain truths. But then he started to get splitting headaches. He started to get exhausted lungs, kind of burnt out lungs, dizziness. And he realised there was something he wasn't doing. There was something else he needed. And somebody told him that up in the mountains, wherever he was in Japan, up in the mountains there was this hermit who taught this special practice called introspective breathing. So Hakuin writes about this in his autobiography. So he goes up the mountain and he finds this hermit, and the hermit teaches him basically a variation of the mindfulness of breathing practice, something that brings him back into his body, brings him down and grounds him in the earth to complement what he was doing with his koan practice. And it changed Hakuin's life, and he went on to teach this method to his own students, one of which is imagining a knob of butter, so a piece of butter placed on the top of the head, which if you did that, it would melt, wouldn't it? Then you imagine the butter kind of melting all the way down through your body, just to come into contact with the ground. So Hakuin's a good example for us of somebody who needed to do that, needed to come down into the body to balance his effort, refine his effort, and not be shooting off so much, but coming down. So we get that in this image that the Buddha gives us of the hen roosting and sitting on the eggs. I think the second thing that we can maybe draw from this image of the hen is that our effort has to be broad. So not just physical and embodied, but a broad effort. So the Buddha says, doesn't he, if she covers some eggs and not others, then they're not going to hatch. And I think that's true for us in our exploration of Buddhism. It needs to be a kind of broad effort that covers different eggs or covers different bases. This talk's becoming quite confessional, isn't it? I have to say that I've not been particularly good at that at different times in my life. So I really want the shortcut. I really want the one practice that if I just have to do that, then I'll make progress and everything will be fine. And I don't have to worry about the other things because it's a bit daunting, all these other things that I might have to learn or learn how to do. When I was at Guhyaloka on the ordination retreat that Tarapalita mentioned, I remember having a bit of a breakthrough when I realized that I couldn't just do one type of meditation. I had to do the whole system of meditation that we practice in Triratna. So mindfulness of breathing, metta, just sitting, 6-element practice, and visualization of a Buddha or Bodhisattva. That's the classic system of meditation that we follow in the order. And I was hoping that I'd just have to do the just sitting one, or you could just sort of sit and relax, or you just have to do the metta and love everybody and forget about the breath, or just the breath because that's a bit easier, and forget other people. But I went into Artapriya, who was doing my meditation reviews on the course. Just 10 minutes a day we would have to get some advice if we needed it. And he's been practicing the Dharma for over 40 years and, in his 60s now. I went in and I said, Artapriya, I've got it. There's no shortcut, is there? And he just looked at me really straight-faced and said, no. If there was a shortcut, I would have found it by now. But actually, on reflection, I think there is a shortcut. And the shortcut is doing all of them. Doing all the things. That's quicker than just doing this for a while, then just doing this for a while, then just doing this. So I think in your own exploration of Buddhism, and this is what I'm trying to do these days, is, take account of all the things that are on offer and are taught. So you'll have explored all of this if you've been coming a while, but ethics, Buddhist ethics, meditation, developing wisdom, studying, learning what the Buddha actually taught, getting to know each other. Spiritual friendship's one of our main emphases, so actually having other people who are on the path with you, getting to know each other, encouraging each other, supporting each other, helping each other grow. We can't leave that out either. I think even for us, something like, we're in a modern Western culture here, aren't we? I think it's probably not too far of a stretch to say that actually Buddhism as it's traditionally been handed down for us isn't enough in a sense. Not that the practices are deficient, but we've still got work to do to bring them together with our own Western mind or our own Western cultural context. So there's some kind of translation that we have to do and bring those things together. So even exploring things like culture and the arts within our own land, so to speak, or our own history, I think that's another egg. That's something else that we can bring some heat to or find some heat in. There are others, aren't there? Ritual, puja, mantra, things like that. It's all there for a reason. And all of these practices hang together. And if we do them all, even if we find some difficult or we find some a bit boring, if we do it anyway, the things that we do enjoy and that we are excited by will be enhanced by that. And actually one day we might, after thinking we hate puja, we might actually really enjoy it. So our kind of understanding of what these practices are and do and the value of them can grow over time. So I think an effort that is broad and takes in all of the different practices, that's the shortcut. That's my current working hypothesis. So let's see how that goes. The third thing I wanted to draw out of the image is it's nurturing, isn't it? So the hen is incubating the eggs and warming the eggs. So that is nurturing, kind of maturing, protecting. The hen's not just providing warmth, is she? She's also protecting the eggs from, foxes or something. Sorry, fantastic Mr. Fox just popped into my mind there. So it's a protecting and nurturing kind of effort. If eggs are fragile, if you don't protect and nurture your own effort and your own aspiration, easily it's squashed, isn't it? And crushed. So yeah, we need that kind of loving awareness of what it is we're trying to do, and a loving awareness for the practices that we're trying to do and the people that we're trying to do it with. So can we bring in or draw out more of a sense of kind of kindliness to our own efforts? And I think the Metta Bhavana is particularly good for this, isn't it? Because we get that first stage that some people really find difficult. Lots of people find really difficult. It is difficult, isn't it? We kind of it seems to be that for a lot of people, self-criticism is a habit, being a little bit too harsh on ourselves. And I think in my own case, that has been something that has driven the effort to fly towards the sun and ignore the other ways of making an effort that are a bit more sustainable. Is a kind of inner self-critique or drive to be something for other people's benefit, or that kind of thing. So really exploring that first stage of the Metta Bhavana, I could do more of that. I think a lot of people could do more of that. And trying to get to the essence of what that stage is about. So I don't think it's just having a good opinion about ourselves or idea about ourselves. It's looking at what we really are. Like what are we? And when we look, it's quite amazing, isn't it? We've got this amazing body for a start that can move and eat and clothe ourselves and wash, and just the fact that we can do that is quite incredible. Not only that, we've got this thinking mind that can learn languages and read and write and do all these other amazing things that people can do. We've got an imagination that can put ourselves in the shoes of another person and imagine what their life is like, and therefore act more kindly and generously towards them. So whatever we think about ourselves, we've got all these amazing attributes and qualities. So in that first stage of the Metta Bhavana, we can really drop into that. Maybe just leave behind low opinions that we've got about ourselves, or a kind of self-narrative and critique and views, and just explore what it's like underneath that. And then the fourth thing I wanted to draw out the image, this is the last point really, is that I think as well effort needs to be patient, doesn't it? So for the hen, how long does an egg take to hatch? Anybody know? A chicken egg? No. Me neither, but it doesn't happen in a day, does it? Actually, I know Tanya's been watching these bird nesting boxes, so maybe you can tell us at some point, at least how long it takes for a kind of swallow egg to hatch or something like that. Chicken eggs are a bit bigger, aren't they? So maybe it takes longer. But yeah, it takes time. So it takes patience. And I think for myself, this is the hardest aspect of effort to accept, because I want quick results. Even in meditation, I can do this. Do you ever get to that stage in meditation where you're like, this isn't working? I've been sat here for 20 minutes and this isn't working anymore. So maybe I'll try the other practice instead, or maybe I should just leave, or give up and think about something else. I think, like speaking for myself, I am wired to want a quick result. So you're kind of there, aren't you, like calculating, like, oh, is it working? Do I need to do a bit more of this, or should I do a bit more of this? The hen's not doing that, is she? She's not sat there thinking, oh, do I need to give that egg a little bit more heat, or that one a bit more heat? So she's just sat there, patiently waiting, and sure enough, the eggs will hatch. And actually the Buddha in this teaching, when he says that it's like a hen sitting on her eggs, you can't just have the wish, you've also got to have the action. He says that if you have the action, actually you don't need the wish anymore. So the hen doesn't have to sit there thinking, oh, may my chicks with their tiny beaks and claws break out of these eggs. She just needs to sit there. And then he brings in another image to demonstrate this. So he says, if you got a carpenter and a carpenter's apprentice, and they were working away on wood with their tools, if they were to do that, the tools would eventually wear down. But the carpenter doesn't need to think, are my tools wearing down as they're doing the woodwork? It's inevitable, isn't it? If we do this, it's inevitable that this will happen, is what the Buddha's saying. If a hen sits on her eggs, it's inevitable that they'll hatch, if she does it correctly. If the carpenter works on the wood with his tools, it's inevitable that the tools will get worn down over time. It's the same for us. If we do the mindfulness of breathing every day, to pick an example, we will become more integrated. We will get to know ourselves more and get to know our minds more. If we sit every day and bring a friend to mind and think of them kindly, it's inevitable that our love for them will grow over time. We don't need to think about whether it works or how it works. Maybe we need to do it a few times enough to see the effects of that, but at the same time we need to trust that these things do have an effect. Or at least we can see it in other people, can't we? Because when the effect will come, we can't tell, can we? Just like the hen can't tell when the eggs are going to start hatching. But we can see it in other people. So like I mentioned Artapriya a moment ago, who's been doing this for over 40 years, you can tell it's had an effect, especially when you hear him tell stories about him in his younger days. You know, I won't tell you them. But you know it's had an effect. You can see it in other people. Probably if you've been around for a little while, you can see it in yourself. I think that's true for me. I need to stop trying to see if it's working now and just look back a little way. And I can see that, oh yeah, those things that I was doing then were really unhelpful. And then I stopped doing them. And largely that's been through my exploration of Buddhism in all its different ways. So I think that is a key aspect of effort, actually, that trusting effort. Trusting effort and patience and waiting to see and not expecting kind of quick results. So there's another image that the Buddha gives us. I'll end with this. So after saying about the hen and the eggs and the carpenter and the tools, he gives the monks another image as well. He says, it's just like an ocean-going ship. So a ship that goes out onto the ocean and endures the heat of summer and then endures the rains of the monsoon season. So it's wooden, obviously it was a wooden ship in those days. So the wood has been weathered by the heat and the rays of the sun, but it's also been moistened by the rain and the water. If that ship were then to be grounded on the shore, pulled up onto the shore and left for the winter, it would be inevitable that the ropes on the ship would wither and rot away. They would just disappear. You wouldn't need to think about it, that's just what would happen. And the Buddha says, if you make the right effort, it's inevitable that the ropes that bind you, the fetters that bind you and keep you from unfolding, from growing, developing, evolving, becoming a Buddha, ultimately, those things will wither and rot away. So through our effort, we can expect that that's what will happen. It's a natural process. That's the thing, isn't it? There's a naturalness to how our minds, let's say, or our hearts, open and expand. So the Buddha discovered this himself when he was still seeking enlightenment. He'd gone through all these austerities where he was kind of punishing himself, hardly eating a thing, sitting out in the sun, getting so thin that he could feel his belly button through, he could feel his spine through his belly button. And one day, after going down towards the river and collapsing, he realized, this isn't working. Something's wrong here. I'm not released, and yet I'm also on the brink of death. And so eventually he saw that wasn't the way, and that, like I've said, a kind of kinder, broader, more grounded approach was necessary. And he had this memory of himself as a young boy, sat beneath a rose apple tree and watching his father ploughing a field. And he just said that he went into a naturally expansive state, and there was pleasure there. And he wondered to himself, if I were to try to access that type of ease and pleasure, maybe that would be the way. And that's what he did. He brought in that sense of natural unfolding and pleasure into his effort. So the Buddha's effort also broadened, deepened, became kinder, became more pleasurable, became more nurturing and maturing. So it's natural that those things unfold if we allow them. So part of our effort is to allow. Just like the ship, we've got another image of grounding there, haven't we? It's pulled up onto the shore, it's earthed, but then we just allow the weather to come. So if we make an effort to do certain things, then we just allow, and then something else can unfold in us or through us. So maybe we're not too dissimilar ourselves to those alchemists who, all right, we do certain practices, we work on certain things, but we're getting worked, you could say, almost by something else. Something is working through us or trying to work through us. And you can see that in each other. You know, people, you'll have met people in the lobby there having a cup of tea at breaks and things. And it's that classic conversation, isn't it? Like, what's brought you here? I thought I'd try meditation. I wanted to relax a bit more, or I'm interested in Buddhist ethics. I want to do something good for the planet. We can see these aspirations in each other, can't we? Trying to come out. There's a naturalness to that, but we just need to learn ways, practices, encourage each other and support each other to allow those ropes just to fall away in the weather of life. That's what I'm trying to do. So giving the talk is one of my attempts to expose myself to the weather and allow those ropes to fall away. So I hope in sharing that, it's definitely a live exploration for me. I hope in sharing some of those thoughts, it's helpful. It helps you in your efforts, and that you can realize whatever it is that you've come here to realize or to discover. I'll finish there. Thank you.